for Yadira De La Riva, Liza Jesse Peterson, and Marc Wolf, please. Thank you. So, as we set up our chairs for a panel discussion here to talk about their research to performance methods, again, that ricochet and echo some of Sekou's methods, I wanted to just end up with something that really struck me yesterday as I was putting together reading packets and papers for the students in this class. Secou, as I mentioned, the phrase thinking out loud came from a speech he gave in 2004 to an arts convention. But yesterday, September 11th, 2014, when I looked at the banner headline in the New York Times about Obama's new bombing strategy in Iraq and Syria, Sekou's paraphrase, he's paraphrasing Malcolm X here, came back to me. And he writes, if you think those old ways will produce new results, you've been had, you've been took, you've been misled. When we're talking about democracy and the imagination, this is where you and I enter the picture with the particular work that we do in this world. And again, he's speaking to a convention of artists. And he said, the imagination is our field of operation. Just to be clear, when I say imagination, I'm thinking of both of both the private realm of the individual mind and the social realm of public life, how one shapes the other and vice versa. I think the imagination as a necessary and sacred space, a space in which, if not probable, all is possible. Although it exists within material borders, it is shaped to a large degree by the material world. Though it is shaped by the material world, it can transcend those borders. So please welcome Rasu, Jilani, and all of the rest of our speakers. I also would like to, hang on one second, introduce our two fellows, Aliyah Hakim and Mimi Rooney, who will also be joining the artists on this panel. Thank you so much.
Check, check.
So I'm going to offer you.
Hi. I think we all need to take a moment to reflect on the bombardment of information we just received. I think it really reflects on a breakdown of democracy in different ways. I'm still processing. That was beautiful. Okay, less serious. Check this out. So what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna have less of a conversation with them, and I'm gonna have a conversation with everyone, all right? Oftentimes we do this panel discussion thing, and it's like the experts on the stage, and the audience is out here, and then we give you like 5 minutes to reflect on all the things we said, and then we run out of time, we tell you to go. That's not gonna happen tonight. What we're gonna do instead is, I'm gonna start off with a question, and I'm gonna have two young ladies walk through the aisle with mics, and using this moment to reflect, you know, process what you're thinking and come out with an articulation, a question, or a statement. Now, the rules of engagement is this. If you have a statement, keep it within 30 seconds. We do not need a thesis. If you have a question, be pointed. And I would even repeat the question to the panelists to answer. And I may answer if I have an answer. I will start with a statement that is a reflection of Sekou Sundiata to connect what we saw and what Sekou's methods were. Also, I want to actually give a more elaboration of the two fellows we have on the stage. We have Mimi Rooney, Millicent Rooney, and Aliyah Hakim. They are representing the class that parallels our public program tonight. There's a course called Radical Citizenship, Art Making, I don't know the full title, sorry. But Cecilia, Willpower, and Brian are the professors of that course. So they will have some reflections of the students and questions of the students. They are representing the students' voice tonight. all right? So that's a little different from most of the panels where we're allowing the students to have a voice with the panelists. So our panelists, Marc, Yadira, Liza, thank you. So I'm gonna start off with Sekou. Sekou, in his latter years, right before he passed, he was working on a project called the America Project. And Sekou was a radical thinker, he was a performer, he was an artist. And right at the post 9/11, he started to reflect on his role as a citizen of America. Before he would say, you know, I'm of America, but I'm not, sorry, I'm in America, but I'm not of America. And 9/11 put us all, even myself, in a very contemplative state of, okay, what is it as an American and how am I a citizen? So he went through this research in investigation called the America Project. It was 5 years. What ended up with that project, it evolved into a performance called the 51st Dream State. And all of the engagements in those years were potlucks, community programs, conversations, became content for the performance. And this is also what we see here, right? So here's the statement. The America Project that emerged from the creative work of artist, poet, performer Sekou Sundiata was a response to 9/11. Those events triggered a commentary, an unsettling conversation with himself to understand what it meant to be an American. He knew right away that the world was changing in ways that challenged what he understood in his life and his work to that point. So he took on the project as an investigation about critical citizenship. Sekou, through residencies, community engagement programs, and so on, went face-to-face with artists, scholars, everyday people, asking the question, what does it mean to be a critically engaged citizen in the time of intensifying U.S. imperialism? So my question to the panel is, what are your thoughts on this idea of the critically engaged citizen? And how does that show up in your work, if it does at all?
30 seconds?
No, you have all the time you want.
What immediately popped into my mind was that to be a critically engaged citizen, you have to know history too. And I say that because I know a little bit of history of the Holocaust time because I played a character in a different play who was living in Jerusalem during World War II, came to New York and tried to get the Holocaust sort of publicized because the Jewish community here and the Roosevelt administration was trying to get the Jewish people to be quiet because they were scared of stirring up anti-Semitism here in America. So I just sort of knew that from playing this character, and I knew it from some Hebrew school stuff that I had studied as a kid. But when I got faced as a gay person with Don't Ask, Don't Tell, where the government was silencing a different community, also one of my communities, it triggered something in me because of the other history I knew about. So I would say, know your history and be able to recognize when it's coming back and what happened before when people didn't step up and do something.
I don't know if we're taking turns, but along the lines of what you're saying is, to me, it's connecting the personal to political, because I saw that border stories weren't being told in like the larger media, in theater, or any other place that I wanted to be a part of. And so I had a mentor, Josefina Lopez. She said, any woman of color writing her own story is a political act in itself. So I'm like, whoa, okay. And I did. I started looking at my family first. And once they told me about events, just events in their lives, and then I connected it to the year. What year did that happen? And then it was like the political climate of that time. And because it all takes place on the border, everything's related to immigration policy. So just making those connections, not only do I get to tell our story, but how it makes sense in the larger context of the United States and Mexico. That's what I thought was like a discovery point for me personally and then in the larger society.
Yeah, it's always interests me, and I think it's important for all of us, whether you're artists or whether you're not an artist, about bearing witness. What are we bearing witness to? We're all bearing witness to something in our lives, in our community, and in this planet that we're sharing. And in bearing witness, what has you emotionally engaged? It's about being engaged and being emotionally present to what we're witnessing, right? And so I may not be emotionally engaged with everything to the degree that I'm emotionally engaged with something else. So for me, it was the prison industrial complex and working in that environment that sparked something in me. And to your point about doing research and knowing the history, I didn't know the history of the prison industrial complex. I was in it, I was working in it, my boyfriend was in it, I was in it, I was bearing witness, and I was unaware that I was bearing witness, but I was affected. So I had to pay attention to my emotional life. And so there was something that was pulling on me, and so I started to do research. I said, this is, I'm in a rabbit hole, and I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know the information, and so I wanted to question what I was bearing witness to, because I knew what I was bearing witness to was unnatural, but I couldn't articulate how unnatural it was because I didn't have the information. So I started to research, and that took me further into the rabbit hole, and I said, oh my God, I am in some shit. And so the rabbit hole just kept descending and descending, and that's what gave birth to the piece, was my bearing witness and then researching what I was bearing witness to and then responding to it in an emotional and creative and artistic way.
So that is the seed in terms of what instigated the pieces for each of you. One of the seeds. So do you have so with that said, is there, why, outside of, for you, the mass incarceration having, a loved one in it and your curiosity, why follow through and go so far with gathering this information and then performing it, developing a work out of this? Why?
Artists, we're strange creatures, and I like to think of us as sponges. And I know for me the process was, in writing the piece, I didn't go into prison looking to write a piece. So that wasn't my intention, like, oh, I'm here, let me write about, let me, report what's happening. I was in it, I was living it, I was teaching in it. And so it was being a sponge, my sponge was full. And so I was so inundated with information and wanted to share it with my students. When I researched the information about the prison industrial complex, I was in the classroom with these teenage boys sitting at Rikers Island, and I said, I gotta share with them this thing that they're in, because I'm learning. So I was teaching them about it as I was learning it. And so literally, my cup literally runneth over. And I always tell the story, and it really, it's just kind of, it was an organic process. I was living it, and I was teaching every day, working in prison, teaching in prison. My boyfriend was in prison. I was on the bus, going upstate to see him, coming home, teaching the kids, and it was just like my whole life revolved around prison. I met a guy. I was just trying to break out of this whole, Florence Nightingale prison thing, and the guy that I met was in halfway house and just came home from prison, and I was just like, what the fuck is going on in my community and in my life that I'm this magnet for, prison? And so I remember calling my best friend, Tish Benson at the time, and just, pity pot, my life is shit, I'm in prison, just pity pot, sorry, me. And just being really whiny. And she laughed at me. She said, girl, you better write that shit down. And she hung up the phone. Literally. And so I just got to my journal, and I said, because it was just so much that I was bearing witness to, that and my cup runneth over, I had to, And so it just kind of started out as a monologue. It was never a thing where I said, I'm going to write a piece about prison. It was an organic kind of, I have to release this, I have to do something with this, and it kind of told me what to do with it.
Marc, Yadira, anything?
I definitely wanted to write it. I'm like, I'm writing this. Also because they say, you know, if something doesn't exist, you have to create it. So it's like, okay. And I don't know what it's going to be like, but I'm going to do it. And yeah, but I think the rest of it could be organic because it would be like 2 a.m. and I can't sleep and it's like, you know, just whatever comes out. And then, oh, that could be a scene. And then, you know, the characters too. And I just spent the weekend with another compañero from El Paso. And the stories that he tells me, this is the first time that we have conversations together. And I'm like, I wrote about that. I'm like, it's so funny at so many of the things that you're talking about. And even though I didn't personally go through it, I wrote it. And maybe it's a memory that I have that I can't place, you know, to a certain person or, you know, but I have those stories in me. But I was pretty purposeful. I wanted to hopefully be a woman for other young women like me growing up that could see themselves. I'm like, I hope, yeah.
So it's hard to imagine now how recently, how dangerous it was for gay people to talk to me. It really was terrifying for them, and they had trained themselves not to talk about it. I mean, I could list the horror stories that in the play there are some horror stories told too. But I really, what happened was when Clinton brought it up, there were these stories of these gay people. I didn't even know gay people in the military existed. And for me, it broke down so many stereotypes. The idea, which doesn't make sense now in 2014, but in the 1990s, gay people speaking about being in the military broke down so many stereotypes of gay people, but it also broke down so many stereotypes of what military people are too. And then Don't Ask, Don't Tell went into effect, and all these gay people really were thrown out of the military that had come out during the debates. They were just kicked out. And everybody else went back in the closet, and all these people disappeared. The whole storytelling disappeared. So I don't know why. I knew these were great stories, and they were taken away from me. And it was, you know, I forget what we were talking about backstage, but there's something about it was illegal for them to talk to me, and it was illegal for me to ask them against the federal government. And so and I wasn't in the military at all. And I thought, well, maybe somebody in the military should do this play. But then I said to myself, well, if somebody in the military should do this play, then they should do it. And I'm not going to wait. I think that's the thing about, don't wait for somebody else to do it if you think somebody else should do it. If you feel passionate about it, do it.
Thank you. Just want to do a quick audience check. Anyone have any reflections, questions before we move forward? Raise your hand. Oh, do you have any other? State your name, and if you're a student or not, or a visitor.
Hi, I'm Karen. I am a student at Eugene Lang, the New School. My question is, it seems like all of your pieces have this kind of message of change, and what kind of change are you looking for in the people that you are presenting these, you know, performances to? What kind of, that's my question. What do you see coming out of your performances?
So what do you think the impact in the policies or the issues that you're investigating in your piece when you perform these as art pieces? And correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm going too far tangent. What do you think will be the impact of performing this in terms of the people, the policy, the issue? What is that change you're looking for?
I didn't think about that when I wrote it, but now that it's a breathing thing, my intention is to hopefully spark awareness, national awareness, and compassion, and visibility, because prison is, the invisible big black elephant in America's living room, right? And so just shining a light on making this elephant visible and part of the national dialogue to spark changes in policy, but not just changes in policy, but really, I want, my intention now that this piece has legs, I want to see the system to crumble. I want to see not changes in policy, I want to see a new system, because this system doesn't work. So it's not about changing the policy of the system, but creating a whole new system and rethinking how do we deal with crime punishment in a humane way.
Before Mark goes, there's something I really wanted to shine a light on when you said that in terms of the system. I don't know how many really understand how insidious the system is, but just to give you an idea, America's prison system, we have more prisoners than China, Russia, Iraq, North Korea. These are considered the most oppressive countries in the world, right? We have more prisoners than them. They have more, some countries have more constituents than us. We have more prisoners. So just kind of marinate on that a little bit when you talk about the system and what we're doing here.
There are two things. I'll try and hold on to both thoughts. One is that a lot of people said to me, most people are coming to your show, they're going to be theater people, they're going to be gay people, because it's gays in the military. Aren't you preaching to the choir? And one thing I always said was, there is no choir to preach to, because the gay people that go to the theater didn't really care about gay people in the military. This was not a gay cause. Their stories had to get out there to be told. Most gay people that go to the theater live in urban areas, and they didn't know any gay people in the military, because they come from more rural areas, usually they're poorer areas. So this is a class-ish, there's a whole class thing to this. But anyway, the choir the choir needed to be preached, so the choir needs to be preached too. The other thing is that, in terms of getting really specifically back to your question, I remember I interviewed a federal judge, and I was in a low point in the 3-year process, saying, I don't know what this, your work is so important, you're dealing with the law, blah, blah. And he said to me, and I really don't think that he was trying, no, actually this was a woman lawyer that I interviewed. This was a lawyer I interviewed. Well, they both sort of said the same thing. Anyway, they said, policy doesn't change, systems don't change from the top down. Even the Supreme Court is not going to turn over gays in the military until there's a movement among the people. Even if it's unconstitutional, they don't care. They need a movement from the people. They need to hear the political will. And what you are doing as an artist is the beginning step of that. So this is, I do think that change really happens by telling stories, by moving people, and then they start to connect the thought. And then thank God that Don't Ask, Don't Tell is an example of this, how this can change. Not that I did it, but but change can happen. So I really think it does begin with storytelling and artistry and getting people to start just the conversation. And that's told to me by a federal judge.
I agree. I totally agree with that. I think what I'm trying to do with this piece is just for us to question what this border is. Like, what is it? Physically, symbolically, what is it? That also wasn't my intention when I was writing it. I think it's just forming itself. But last year that I did the show along the U.S.-Mexico border, and I got to see it, what it looks like all along the way. And just see, there was, I want to say it's Del Rio, Texas. And so you see a huge, massive wall, and then all of a sudden it ends. And then there's like sticks held together by barbed wire. You're like, what is going on? Like, it's so contradictory in so many ways. And I think when we think of immigration policy, we think of it maybe on DC level and DF, Mexico City, and these, capitals making all of these decisions, but what does it look like on a local level? Is some of what I'm trying to bring up. And then with what you're saying in your piece, just the same thing. It's like, who's the company that is paying for that to get built? Who's building it? Who are the people going to these detention centers? It's money. It's all money. And I think if we use our stories to uncover this, then won't give the border as much meaning as these countries want to give it. It's like, it's a lie. It's a money-making lie. That's what I hope to say in any way.
Yes, mass incarceration, mass deportation are both, they hang them by the same thread of that war on the poor and, the profit that can be made from it. So I definitely saw it through line with both of your pieces, especially. So before we get any further, I want to check in with the fellows. Are there any questions or from the students in the class?
From students in the class. I have a question myself right now. Well, first of all, thank you all so much. So inspiring to have you. But as a aspiring, socially engaged art maker myself, I'm really curious about process. And I'm hearing from Yadira and Liza that these stories, as you were saying, you were bearing witness to them. They were really close to home. All of this material was things you were experiencing. So this is more aimed at Marc. Marc, I want to know about your process more. Most of your material is from interviews, correct? So if you could tell us some more about that and how you reached out to people and made those connections, that'd be great.
Yeah, so it's all based on interviews. There's one monologue that was taken from Senate testimony, which was such a circus, the Senate testimony back in the 90s. It's just disgusting, the homophobic language that came from senators to people in uniform who, are trying to serve their country. But anyway, it's interesting because I don't think today I could have done, if Don't Ask, Don't Tell existed now, I don't think I could have done it with all the surveillance and the bees and all that stuff, because I had to, I couldn't send out an internet blast. Does anybody know any gay people in the military? Because, I would have exposed everybody. It was dangerous to talk on the phone. I'm pretty sure I was bugged a couple times, but I'm not positive. So I would go, basically living in New York, I have friends from all around the country. Friends heard that I was working on this. They would call somebody back in Iowa and say, hey, we went to high school together. Somebody stayed there, they're gay. They're dating somebody at the base, aren't they? And then so they would call that person in, and then I would fly near there and then drive and then meet that one person. Sometimes the person didn't show up because it really was that dangerous. And so I would meet that person, interview that one person, and say, is there anybody else you think I should talk to? And of course, there's always one or two people. So then I would interview those one or two people, and then they led me to one or two people. And then I would leave after 3 days because the potential of exposing this community was huge, the damage that could happen. So that's basically how it went. And it is all from interviews inspired by Anna Deavere Smith's work, which I had seen her do. And I just thought it would be a great way to explore this political issue without having to deal with the plot in a play.
There was, what was very interesting about your piece was, well, my favorite parts was when you seemingly messed up. And the reason why is because you didn't break character. You were still in the character. And really, no, you were still there. So, at least from our perspective. And the other thing was, when you were choking up, I wasn't sure if that was the character of you. That was very interesting. So, marvelous job. Check-in. Any questions from? Yep.
Hi, how you doing? I'm Darren. I'm a poet, performer. I wanted to talk a little bit about, when we talk about revolution, we talk about the crumbling of system. Can we just have a discussion on, I guess, what we envision after we've crumbled a system, and what does that look like? Because I feel like there's a lot of talk about what we want to bring down and not necessarily what we want to replace it with. And how do we go about governing that system? And the more specific we can get, the better. Thanks.
So the revolution is happening. The powers are crumbling. What power are we going to put in place, if there is a power?
I would like to see communities self-policing. That's what I would like to see first. I would like to see communities taking responsibility for their communities. I would like to see, particular, the healing process in, particularly in the Black community, with our families and how we treat each other, how we talk to each other, how we raise the children. I would like to see healthy food in the community. I would like to see us growing more healthy food, because I think that the toxic food exacerbates the behavior that we see in the community. So that's what I want to see. I want to see more food being grown. I want to see more, men and women, but particularly the men, standing up and policing our own communities and really being accountable for the young brothers and sisters who are coming up. So that's what I would like to see take place as we move through this great shift that we're in the midst of, that we're all bearing witness to, that we all signed up cosmically to be here at this moment to usher it in. That's what I would like to see on the other side.
I guess I would like to add that I see a lot of this happening in the Zapatista communities.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
yeah, so it's not just ideas. Like these are it's happening. All of that. It was just so good to be able to be in a space where all of that is happening already. And I think they had to isolate themselves from the government too. They had to stop asking. It's like, you know what? We're gonna create our own communities, our own schools, our own self-defense system, our own education. We're gonna take back the land. We're gonna raise our own food, all of it. And so I believe in everything that you say, also because I got a chance to visit a place where that's happening right now. And also, I think we have a lot of fear to let go of in this country, a lot of fear. I don't know, I feel like they had to just be fearless because they had absolutely nothing to lose. They were like, we have nothing.
Yeah.
One quick thing. I don't know how to govern. That's a good question. But in terms of, in terms of family structure, I see that changing in a positive way, with what the nuclear family is defined and who can take care of children and how we raise our children. And I think it can be more fluid, and I think it's becoming more fluid as from my perspective, as gay people are allowed to raise children and get married and adopt children. Although I'm not sure about marriage. That's the whole part of the structure too. So I don't know, that's another conversation.
My 2 cents is a society that puts in place more humanity. Humanity comes first. Empathy, and I think we need to have more women leaders, honestly. I think the guys fucked it up. Just to be honest. We're talking about the NFL, and they're talking about Condoleezza Rice taking over his commission. I'm like, actually, that's a really good idea. So that's my 2 cents as well. Mimi, want to check in with you? Any comments from the students?
Okay. Again, thank you so much for being here. Performances were amazing. In terms of the performances that all three of you have worked on, obviously, you know, you've been working on them for some time, and they've, you know, undergone extensive touring and possibly revision. And I'm sure that, you know, you've all seen, you know, changes to the social or political climate since you started working on your pieces. So since 2011, for example, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, yet transgender people are still barred from serving in the military. Or more recently, you know, media attention has come to the underage, you know, immigrants fleeing like gang recruitment here in the U.S. So I'm wondering, and there are other examples as well, but I'm wondering how your pieces have evolved and changed as you continue to work on them, you know, as you represent, you know, the struggles of each of these communities.
My piece didn't change at all. When I revived it, we really talked seriously, producer and director and me, about should I do more interviews and update it. But the material is from such a specific time that it's like a time capsule. And again, I think it's going back to the history. There's this time capsule, and if you can look at this time capsule and see how it reverberates now, it's as updated as it needed to be. So it didn't change, which I was a little surprised by that. But I think it kept it truthful to the moment that it took place, because as I'm saying, in the mid 90s to the late 90s is very different than now. But I think it reflects back. And one thing people said was, oh my God, when I revived it, now he has gray hair. It's been this long. The performer now has gray hair. He looks so much older. And we still have this in effect. And he's still saying the same words, and it's still as effective.
Yeah, similar experience. I wrote the piece, the first draft I wrote in 2003, and that was about 10 years ago, and literally nobody wanted to hear a story, a black woman telling a story about prison. The prison wasn't in the zeitgeist, it wasn't the thing to talk about. So that's why I wound up touring it in prison, because I took it to the people who would appreciate it the most. And the information hasn't changed. The structure changed, because now I'm working, you know, with the Lark Theater and just development and really just giving it a more theatrical arc. But the information has not changed. The statistics have not changed. They may have bumped up, you know, a number or two, but it hasn't changed. The only thing that changed is the Rockefeller drug law changed when I first wrote it. There was no Rockefeller drug law reform at all, and I think like in 2009 they started to reform the Rockefeller drug law, where it's now judges don't have to do their hands aren't tied. Before it was a mandatory minimum 15 to life if you were caught with 4 ounces of a narcotic. And the judge had to do that no matter what, no matter the circumstance. If you were first offense, nonviolent, kid in school, didn't matter. But now, 2009, the Rockefeller drug law has been reformed and revised so that a judge can use their own discretion and say, oh, well, this kid could maybe get a second chance, or maybe it doesn't have to be 15 years, maybe 5 years. So there's more leeway. And also people who were incarcerated under the Rockefeller drug law before the reform, they can now apply to have their cases retried. So, but that's a small, you know, I mean, it's a big change, but it didn't affect the piece.
It's kind of similar to yours too, is a lot of the monologues have stayed the same. A lot of the information has stayed the same, but it's how can I add more theatricality to it? How can I add different elements, whether it's poetry or music? I had projections at some point also. Actually, that's how I first did it. It had projections, just to visually take people to the border. And themes have changed. Just because I feel like I wanted to address so much that I'm like, oh, I want to talk about, because there was a point that my one of my sisters was using drugs, and it was so heavy in my family at that time that I'm like, I want to talk about that, because that's all that we're talking about, you know, in this family. So then I'm like, okay, well, let me use these same scenes to talk about that through that voice. How is it affecting women, drug users on the border? Then there was, you know, just following maybe a sequence of events. And now I think I'm really addressing what does American mean, and what does this border mean, because I just came from there. So I feel like it evolves with my own learning and maturity of the piece itself.
Yeah, I have tons of questions that we're just not going to get through tonight. But with that, talking about the changes or adjustments in your pieces, my question, piggybacking off of Mimi's, is what have you seen policy-wise that have changed along? I'm assuming each one of you have spent a great deal of time on each one of your pieces, right? So what policy change have you seen shifted? Eric Holder recently announced that they were looking at mass incarceration, well, drug policies in terms of minimum, maximum sentences, where if you were caught with a petty drug crime and it wasn't violent and it wasn't tied to cartel or crime syndicate gang, they would not enforce a minimum sentence, maximum sentence on that. So what other types of policies have you seen shifted, if any, since you started your piece?
The crack and cocaine sentencing recently, you could, a person who was selling crack cocaine would get a sentence if they sold the same amount. If somebody who sold crack and somebody who sold cocaine, they sold the exact same amount, the person who sold crack, their sentence would be 2 to 3 times harsher than the person who sold cocaine with the same exact amount. And you know, that of course boils down to race and poverty. So that was something that Obama, he did that, through Eric Holder. I'm seeing some changes, start to happen, and the fact that people are talking about prison a lot. Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. So people are talking about it now. It's not the big black elephant in the room that was invisible is now starting to appear. People in America, and people are really starting to talk about it and address it. Even though I have a lot to say about the show, but Orange is the New Black. So people are, prison. It's in the front of the consciousness. Before it was really back here, and it was like, shh, we didn't even talk about our relatives in prison. That was like a secret. You didn't, it was something that you didn't talk about. It was a lot of shame around it. So there's not the same level of shame, and there's policies, I think, that are starting to, with Eric Holder, because again, it's not working. And the war on drugs is a colossal failure. There was a consortium of urban mayors across the country that said this war on drugs is stupid, it's costly, it's not working. I mean, the mayors of urban cities, they were like, we have to do something different. So I've been seeing that happen since 2003 when I first wrote the piece, and that's not including the research I did 5 years before that, when it was just like nobody was talking about it. It was just lock them up, throw away the key, 15 to life, clink, clink, clank. That was it.
It's so different now. I keep saying that. But I did all this research before 9/11. And this is not so much policy. Obviously, Don't Ask, Don't Tell doesn't exist anymore. We have more gay marriage. And I think that Don't Ask, Don't Tell crumbling was really the first step towards a lot of other, gay issues, civil rights issues. It really was the first thing that needed to fall, because if if you can't defend your country, you're just not seen as equal. But before 9/11, which very few of you will know, but the military was so separate from our society. It was like it didn't exist. It was in the closet too. Like, because Vietnam was such an embarrassment, our military was so powerful as it is now, but it was all sort of secret. And at least now, with 9/11 and all our wars, at least it's more open, and we are engaged with the military. It's not such a separate thing that it was before, and for bad reasons, that's the way it is. But I think it should be that way. I think as a democracy, we need to know what's going on in our military and be invested in what our military is doing. And we are more now, but we were really tromping around the world before 9/11 too, and it was just a very different relationship that I think that the citizens had with the military, and now it's more merged.
Yadira, you can close it out.
Okay. I've definitely seen a lot of, I have a lot of respect for all the dreamers, the undocumented young people that are coming out. I think they're really like the leaders that are pushing laws right now, because they're coming strong, you know, just like that, unafraid, undocumented and unafraid, doing like, actions, going to the border, you know, putting their lives at risk to go to Mexico and back, you know, and just demanding their rights as human beings, to be given all the rights that everybody else has in this country. So I really have a lot of respect for them. I think that's where it's at. Also, on the other hand, and it's funny that both of you referenced 9/11 also, because that's, I feel, was the trigger for these borders to be enforced. So while I see a lot of movement coming from the people and from the young people, at the same time, it's more money going to the militarization of the border. Fort Bliss was expanded. Fort Bliss is the military base, the army base in El Paso. It got expanded after 9/11. The wall got built after 9/11. The war on drugs in Juarez, you know, was after that too. So it's a mix, yeah.
All right, we have to wrap up. They're gonna kick us out soon. So let's give question. One, you're gonna be the last one. So is it a statement or a question?
Statement, observation, whatever.
Sure.
Is that cool? Okay. My name is Jeff. I'm a student here, but I actually want to say that I'm an organizer. I grew up in the Lower East Side around here, and I'm an organizer. I work with the Asian American youth group that actually works on police brutality in the city and stuff, working on like acts against, like the Community Safety Act last year and stuff. I thank you so much to all three of you for performing your pieces. Like, it really moved me and stuff. I do want to say, like, I do also see this auditorium. There are mad empty seats here, and I want to point that out because, like, I think that, and I already know, Liza, you already talked about how, like, you're bringing, your piece to, like, people who, like, might feel like going around prisons and stuff, right, and sharing it with folks and stuff. But I also, you know, as an organizer, knowing so many organizations that work with communities that also, you know, face the issues that that are reflected in your pieces, right? I think, this is also, like, so my observation is that there are mad empty seats. I think these seats could be filled with a lot of community members in the city and stuff, and it's, like, I think your pieces, I think, would be, like, really great at, like helping validate a lot of these communities' experiences and stuff, and could also lead to, like, what Liza was talking about, this, like, transformative change, right? Breaking down the system, and also, like, how, like, I think, like, what Yadira said was talking about, like, how, like, sharing your story is like an act of political warfare, right? and how like I think these things can also bring about change, but like I also think we have to be mindful about like the type of things like the accessibility of like what y'all do and stuff, and how like that can like you know, help the community as well. Yeah.
Yes, and we're all working on that, you know.
You want to elaborate on that?
We're all working on that. You know, civic engagement is something that's not, it's not as fancy as a concert, you know, or it's not appealing as a concert, but it's the work that needs to be done to push the conversation forward. So if when you say panel discussion, people, I want to hear people talking, but it also brings the consciousness up, right? So it's something that we all have to work on, building the dialogue. And I would just say that Lisa has joined the MAP team, and we're going to tour her piece, Peculiar Patriot, when it's finished. It's still a work in progress. So big ups to Liza for joining the team.
Big up for Matt for wanting to hear me talk my shit.
We're really going to close out. John, how much time do we have? Are we done? Yeah. One more, then we're done.
I have a mic. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. That was dope. I asked this. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Sorry, I'm kind of tired. I asked this question actually yesterday at the last day of Art and Ideas, or some iteration of it. But I think it is something that's still on my mind and on my heart, as I'm a student here, as an art maker who also is hoping to do work around social justice and social change and identity. But yeah, like accessibility, that's really interesting and important, and there are a lot of empty seats in this room. And even if the seats were filled, like who chooses to be in this room? And that's something that I have been thinking about a lot recently, and about who we create work for and to what end, and who hears that work, and how we get out of creating work within an echo chamber, and how we, and also, so there's that, and I would love to hear reflections if that resonates with any of you on the stage, including student fellows. And also two things, like, I wonder also, like, there are so many stories that should be told, and that need to be told, but I also wonder at the politics of who tells those stories. Like, a lot of you are telling your own stories, which is wonderful, and some of you are telling stories from your own identities, but I wonder also, like, what your reflections might be about if someone's like, wow, I'm really passionate about that topic or that story or that experience, but it's not my own experience, and how they might, if they want to engage with it, how they might go about that, or if they should engage with it, and what those politics might look like. So I guess I'm kind of asking, I'm putting out the topics of accessibility, who's in the space, creating work within an echo chamber, and also who's allowed to tell what stories and that kind of thing. I wasn't really gonna talk, but then
we needed that question earlier.
Sorry.
The last one is really interesting. I was actually thinking about this because I live in Harlem now. I lived in Hell's Kitchen for a long time. I lived in Harlem, and I was thinking the other day, it'd just be so great if I like interviewed all my neighbors just on my street or on my block, and only played African Americans. I think that there's something about one person playing other people which unconsciously makes us all come together, I think. And I think that as I be playing people who are not of my race, eventually I think it would disappear who I am, and you just be listening to the words. And I think that, like, when I played men and women, it didn't ever say who I was playing, so you just end up listening to the words and people's ideas if it's a solo person. And you don't know who I am. It doesn't have to say on the board, on a slide, who I am. You just have to know this person, not from how they look, but from what you have to listen to their words. And so I think that there are a lot of rules still about who I'm allowed to play in the theater producing world. And I think that that's a great next step for you to challenge that? Whose stories are we allowed to tell? Who owns whose stories?
In terms of accessibility, I agree with what you said too, to take the play to the border, because I wrote it here in New York. I came up with the idea in California, but then I wrote it here in New York. I performed it for folks here and in other states, but not at the border, and not even in front of my family for a while. So I was starting to feel like a fraud. I'm like, okay, yeah, talk about this topic, but it's not gonna be legit until I take it there and see what people's responses are there. So that's why I'm really grateful that I was able to take it there. Of all the 14 cities that I went to, only one of them was a theater, so I performed in community spaces that hardly get to see theater. And I was just very purposeful about that. Just really wanted to get people's responses that are not even theater folks. And then in terms of who can tell people's stories, that's a little, because I feel like I've seen other people who have never been to the border tell border stories, and that hurts me. I'm like, have you been there? I'm very curious at first. I'm like, thank you so much. You know, how was your process? Have you been there? And they're like, no, I've never been there. I'm like, oh, you know, like I would love for these communities to tell their own stories, to be empowered to tell them, to feel like they even have them. And I have a good feeling that they will very soon, because the border has been impacted in so many ways, especially violent ways, that it's just bound to. People need to talk. So I look forward to it. I look forward to the day that they'll tell their own stories. Yeah.
When I first started doing this piece and I was performing it for inmates, I would always have and I developed the piece in prison at Eastern Correctional, which is a maximum security men's facility upstate New York. And when I started touring it and performing it, I would always have a Q&A after every performance, because I wanted to talk to the audience. I didn't want to just perform and leave. I wanted to have a dialogue. And every single performance, they would say to me, thank you so much. This was amazing. You know, you see us, but we need you to take this piece back out. Take it back out so that they know that we're here. So they gave me a charge and a mandate to take it back out to the main audience, which I was running from, because I felt, you know, as an artist, you know, we sensitive and shit. And so I felt like the theater community, they weren't really open to what I had to say, and you know, it was a lot of politics, and I was like, fuck theater, I'm going to prison. And so the prisoners were like, no, take this shit back to the theater and to the main stage so that these people know what's happening. And so I've just recently, in the past 2 years, have begun the process of just, you know, putting on my thick skin armor, because, you know, it's art, and then there's the commerce of art, and those two have always been, I know, very challenging for me. How do I get my art, turn my art into commerce, and navigating that terrain. You know, having, you know, I think it was Vanessa Redgrave said you have to have the heart of a nightingale and the skin of a rhinoceros to be an artist. And so I've had to develop thick skin, and so now I'm bringing it to main audiences that are not incarcerated, emancipated audiences, and it's been a journey. And to your second question about who can tell the stories, you don't have to experience it to write it. You know, as artists, as a writer, you know, we can use our imagination, and it's really just about, you know, the skill and the intention of your instrument. Like, what is your intention, and are you really skilled at going inside and really connecting with the emotionality of what's happening? And I know for me, I didn't want to, I mean, I could have told it from the perspective of being an inmate. I just chose not to, because I thought it would be more authentic for me to tell it from a perspective of someone visiting an inmate, even though I can empathize with an inmate and the people on the other side of the wall, but it was just more authentic for me. Will that stop me from writing a piece about an inmate? No, because I can get inside of the emotionality as a writer, as an artist. So I don't think that you have to experience it to write it, because We have imaginations, and that's what we do. We take life, imagination, and bearing witness, and we can either write from either perspective or all three mangled together, you know. So I mangle all three together, and he, you know, Mark, he is witness, so he is bearing witness, right? Like his stories, his piece comes from bearing witness. So, and yours is a combination, imagination, bearing witness, and experience. So, and so is mine. So it's just a matter of how you're going to mix it up, you know.
Thank you. So we're going to close out. And the key word is imagination. You know, seeing yourself in this country takes imagination.